At 11:32 a.m. on December 20th, 1943, the sky over Bremen, Germany erupted in fire. Second Lieutenant Charlie Brown, just 21 years old, gripped the controls of his B-17 Flying Fortress, yes, Olde Pub, as black flak bursts exploded all around his formation. This was his first combat mission. He had trained for months, memorized procedures, rehearsed emergencies, but nothing could prepare a young pilot for the violence now tearing through the sky. Below them, more than 250 German anti-aircraft guns opened fire. These were not inexperienced gunners. Many were officer candidate trainees, some of the most accurate marksmen in the Luftwaffe, and they had been waiting all morning. Yes, Olde Pub carried 10 men and 6,000 pounds of bombs. Their target was a Focke-Wulf FW-190 fighter aircraft factory on the outskirts of Bremen. Intelligence officers had warned the crews they would face fierce resistance, but they did not mention one critical detail. Brown's bomber had been assigned to the most dangerous position in the formation. The men of the 379th Bombardment Group called it Purple Heart Corner. It was the exposed edge of the formation, where defensive fire from neighboring bombers could not overlap, and where German fighters attacked first. New crews were often placed there. Brown's crew was the newest of all. Before yes, Olde Pub could release its bombs, a 20mm cannon shell exploded directly in front of the cockpit. The plexiglass nose shattered. At 27,000 feet, temperatures were -60 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind screamed through the aircraft at over 150 miles per hour. The number 2 engine died instantly. The number 4 engine overspeed, forcing Brown to throttle it back to avoid catastrophic failure. The bomber slowed. The formation surged ahead. Within seconds, yes, Olde Pub was alone. German fighters saw it immediately. A pack of Bf-109s and FW-190s descended on the crippled bomber like wolves on a wounded animal. The attack lasted more than 10 minutes. Cannon shells tore into the fuselage. The number 3 engine was hit and dropped to half power. The oxygen system ruptured. Hydraulic lines burst. Electrical systems failed. In the tail, Sergeant Hugh Eckenrode, the tail gunner, took a direct hit from a 20mm shell. He was killed instantly. Most of the crew was wounded. Brown himself was struck by shrapnel in his right shoulder. Extreme cold froze the oil in the defensive guns. Of the 11.50 caliber machine guns, only 3 still worked. Then the oxygen ran out. At that altitude, the human brain cannot survive without supplemental oxygen. Brown felt his vision closing in. His hands went numb. Beside him, co-pilot Spencer Bud Luke slumped unconscious. Brown's last thought before everything went black was simple and devastating. My crew is going to die on their very first mission. The bomber fell. Yes, Olde Pub plunged from 27,000 feet in an uncontrolled dive, airspeed screaming past 300 miles per hour. The airframe shook violently. Any moment, the wings could shear away. Then, against all logic, Brown regained consciousness at barely 1,000 feet above the ground. Thicker air flooded his lungs with oxygen. He grabbed the controls and pulled with everything he had left. The bomber leveled out just above the treetops of northern Germany. Blood covered the cockpit. Men cried out in pain. The tail gunner was dead. The aircraft was barely holding together. And directly ahead lay a German fighter airfield. On that airfield, Oberleutnant Franz Stigler was refueling his Messerschmitt Bf 109G6. He had already shot down 2 American bombers that morning. One more would earn him the Knight's Cross, one of Germany's highest military honors. He looked up and saw yes, Olde Pub limping across the sky at barely 100 feet. Stigler launched immediately. Within minutes, he was behind the B-17, finger resting on the trigger. One squeeze would end it. But when Stigler looked through his gun sight, he saw something that stopped him cold. The tail was destroyed. The gunner was dead, frozen blood hanging in the air. Through gaping holes in the fuselage, Stigler saw wounded men tending to each other. No one was firing back. No one could. They were not fighting. They were surviving. Stigler remembered the words of his former commander, Gustav Rodel. "If I ever hear of you shooting at a man in a parachute, I will shoot you myself." These men might as well have been in parachutes. To kill them now would not be combat. It would be murder. Stigler lowered his guns. Instead, he pulled alongside the bomber and tried to signal Brown to land and surrender. Brown misunderstood, thinking the German was ordering him to crash. He shook his head and flew on. Realizing the Americans would die if he did nothing, Stigler made a decision that could cost him his life. He escorted the bomber. Flying wingtip to wingtip, he shielded Olde Pub from German flak, daring ground gunners to fire and risk killing one of their own. The gamble worked. The coastal defenses held their fire. At the edge of the North Sea, Stigler knew he could go no farther. He pulled alongside the cockpit one last time. He saluted. Then he turned back toward Germany. Charlie Brown watched him disappear into the gray sky. The bomber limped on for 250 miles across freezing water. Engines failed. Men bled. Frostbite set in. But against every odds, they reached England. Olde Pub crash-landed at RAF Seething. 8 men survived. 1 had died. Both pilots were ordered to keep silent. The secret lasted 46 years. When they finally found each other in 1990, the reunion was not between enemies, but brothers. They spent the rest of their lives together, telling the world that even in war, humanity can survive. Franz Stigler never received his Knight's Cross. Instead, he received something greater: a brother for life.